Hello, everybody.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at.
Yeah. I need a different backdrop for while I can cast like something fun back here.
Yeah.
Like a dude ranch scene or something.
Ah, there we go. Or a whole lot of other sad plants.
Hey, you know
I
what?
was just going to say, we just want Sad Plant back.
How is Sad Plant doing, Jason?
He lost a little bit of who he is due to the nature of the sun and its penetrating rays. But he is growing a new horn, so he's going to have a massive new leaf. It may change his face completely, but we'll see.
But we'll still remember Sad Plant. Yeah.
Yeah, we have our memories. Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you should go out and like
So
spray a little
office.
copper tone on him.
Some copper tone.
Hey. Hi.
Oh, hey, Deb.
Hello.
Hi, Wiggly.
How are
Hey,
you?
Deb.
Host of today's webcast.
Welcome. Zelda, it's so good to see your face.
Yeah, well, thank you. Good to see yours.
I'm trying not to look at Velda's camera. It's making me a little seasick.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. Let me
It
get
doesn't
off.
help that I just guzzled like a protein shake, so my stomach's like,
Something to keep him.
Jason, we could talk about the roundup a little bit.
Oh, the
Would that be
roundup,
a
yeah.
possible
physical-
topic for that?
A physical pen test roundup would be amazing.
I like it. So just for those of you who aren't familiar, we're going to be starting to do some new things with Wild West Hackin Fest. So we've got the Wild West Hackin Cast. We have Wild West Hacking Fest training. We've got Wild West Hackin Fest. And then we're going to do Wild West Hackin Fest, the Roundup, which will be kind of a mini summit, so to speak. We'll invite some speakers in and focus on one topic. It'll be anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. So we're really excited about it, getting geared up for that. So just you got the sneak peek here.
Yeah, so if you have any topics that you want us to do a roundup on, like physical pen testing or cloud security or anything, just let us know in the live chat and we'll start putting it together.
Yes, that'd be fantastic.
Did I ever tell you why I quit teaching?
No.
So I taught filmmaking for 9 years. I taught content creation stuff at a film school. And I started on the very first day of class with a talk about Top Gun and how that movie impacted me and then how that led me on a path to learn about storytelling and things like that. And I finally got to that year where I talked about Top Gun and you could see the looks on the students' faces like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh boy.
And I did one of those like, hey, raise your hand if you haven't seen Top Gun. And like 3/4 of the class went up and I was like,
oh, no.
I quit. Done.
Did you feel them?
The generational divide is too strong. It's too big for me to teach you all anything. So
Oh, no. The day Jason lost his relevance. Oh.
A long time ago, too.
Oh, that's
that was 10 years ago.
Yeah, but that was a very good course. I mean, I watched the recording of that you did, and actually it is very good. Even if you don't get the movie reference, it is very good.
Thank you.
So if anybody does want to check that out, watch Top Gun first,
Yes.
then watch.
Yeah, because without Top Gun, I just look like just a crazy man.
Yeah.
He's upside down! He's upside down!
But you could
Why is he yelling goose all the time? I don't get it.
Yeah,
watch the movie.
yeah, at the end of like the whole speech, I do the tossing of the dog tags and you're and then like all the kids are like, I got nothing.
okay.
I got nothing.
Yeah.
Jason,
Yeah, whatever
forgot
that
to
is,
take
it's
his
horrible.
medication today.
There is a new Top Gun movie coming out in December 2020. When they announced Top Gun 2 or the new Top Gun, I don't know if they're calling it Top Gun 2, almost every single student I had ever taught sent me a message on Facebook or wherever, like, they were just like, Jason, look! I see it. I've seen it 1,000 times now. Thank you all for tagging me in every single trailer that's out about Top Gun.
You
You found your niche. How cool is that?
Yeah. You know,
Not once did Tom Cruise invited me to go in a jet with him. So, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you. So before I do, just if you've never been to a Hackin cast before, we do this as a way of bringing industry professionals in to share their knowledge with everyone else. And that is what we're doing here today. So, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you so they can get started right on time.
Real pleasure. I'm going to turn off my webcam as well because I think the most important part of the presentation is what we're going to look at with the slides. I may turn the camera on a little bit, but let's switch over to just the presentation. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking part. We appreciate your giving up time for your day. We're going to talk today about giving technical presentations. I'm going to introduce myself real briefly. I work with Active Countermeasures and also with Black Hills Information Security. I'll be at the Wild West Hacking Fest this year as well, doing the same talk, and as we said earlier, giving you a chance to learn the material. I've been working for more than 10 years at a large training company. I've also given talks to local users groups and internal talks to companies, so I'm very used to the process. My goal today is not to claim that I know everything about public speaking, but to share the tips and tricks that I've had so that you get to understand how to do this yourself and do it well. I'm also contributed to more than 1,000 different software projects, some my own, some others. So software is near and dear to my heart, and being able to give an effective presentation about it is something I think is a useful skill. What happened? This talk is a little bit odd because I'll be switching back and forth between actually giving a presentation and talking about how I gave the presentation. So I hope you'll bear with me on what can be a little bit of an odd ride. The first thing that happened was we started on time. It seems like such a minor thing, but keep in mind that you've got a fixed amount of time that your audience is going to be there. If you start late, you've got a couple of bad choices. One is to cut the material short, to rush through it, or to ask students to stay late. And remember, some of them may have other things that are coming up right at the end of the talk. So if they've got a 3 o'clock call scheduled today, Eastern time, and I run over, then I'm not doing them a good service by respecting their time. I also gave a quick intro. Now, the 30-second bio that I gave isn't designed to show everything I know. All it does is give me a little bit of credibility while I'm getting going with the material. By the time I get to about slide 10, you'll have a pretty good picture of whether I know what I'm talking about or not. But the short bio gives me just a little bit of a starting point so that people will give me the benefit of the doubt while I'm getting going with the material. I want to explain why we're giving the talk at all. So as we talked about in the pre-show banter, this is really for people who have not made presentations regularly before or have, but want some tips and tricks. Let people know what that is. Let them know the goal of the talk so that they know what to expect and what not to expect. The idea is that I want to talk about how to give a technical talk. We're not going to go into any technology today. What do we use for material? What are the tips and tricks that we need? How do you prepare for the talk? All of these are sections that are coming up. When we do this live at Wild West Hacking Fest, whether it's physical or virtual, we're going to arrange that you have a chance to try this out yourself. We want you to be able to give just a short section of a presentation. It could be one that you're going to give anyways, or we'll have some sample slides that you can download, and they're not terribly technical. It's something that anybody could talk about. You get to pick between 3 different slide decks and present for something like 5 minutes. The idea there is that we'll break you up into small groups, and then each person in the group can give feedback to the others about, hey, here's what you did well, and here are a couple things that you can focus on for next time. Because everybody there will be interested in doing public speaking, It's a low stress way of learning how to improve your presentation without having to learn that in front of 40 or 100 or 500 people. What are you going to cover? There's specific things the attendees should know. What will people learn as part of the process? Are there particular tools or techniques that you want to talk about? Make sure you give a quick intro on how your presentation will run and what people will learn. Will this work anywhere? It probably should. As I said before, this isn't about a motivational speech or a sermon on some topic. This is about sharing some kind of technical information. So no matter what that particular area of interest is, it should apply. My background is largely in computers and networking and computer security. So that will probably sneak into a couple of the stories that I give today, but it really should apply to almost any talk that you want to give. There are some differences when you're presenting in front of a room full of people versus a virtual talk like we're doing today, or a pre-recorded podcast or webcast. Some of them are marked differences, some of them are subtle. I'll try to cover where those differences apply and then make it clear what you have to do differently to do one type of talk versus another. In small font, we want to share technical content, but that's not the goal. The goal is to motivate people and to get them excited about the particular content. Anybody can read off a list of instructions. Download this tar file from this website, type this command, go to this directory, move this file to somewhere else. That's not the goal of the talk. You want to share the technical content, but you also want to make sure that you're explaining why this is interesting. Why do people want to do this? Why should people care about your topic? I have had the pleasure of working with some people that, frankly, are masters at making people enthusiastic about a given type of technology. Technologies that should be about as dull as you can imagine, but you listen to somebody talking that way and they really excite you about it. I think you can all kind of think about some examples of speakers that you've heard in the past that you listen to them and you say, wow, I don't even know what he's talking about or she's talking about, and I am thrilled about this topic. That's what I hope you will be. You should be smiling. You should be sharing your joy about the topic. That is far more important than the individual technical facts you could share. How long does it take? It's a tough one. For the type of talk that I'm giving today, where you have, a small number of bullet points and you're covering general technical information, I use about 2 minutes per slide as a benchmark. When I went through this yesterday, we've got about 70 slides to go through, and it took me about an hour and 50 minutes. So it's really helpful when you're preparing for a talk. We'll cover this a little bit more later. It's really helpful to actually go through it end to end with a stopwatch or a stopwatch app that you can pause. There'll be points where you're going through the talk and you're like, oh, that slide doesn't fit here. Let me move it around. Hit pause and then start back in when you're actually presenting, so that when you're planning for an evening presentation or a day-long presentation, you're really confident how long it's going to take, and you know whether you need to move steadily or whether you've got some relaxed time and you can filler. Remember, you're going to have questions along the way. So whatever time you've got, ideally you should have 15 to 25% extra time available for questions. We'll do our best. The other thing I'll offer is that in this particular talk, I'll stay a little bit after the 3 o'clock cutoff, so if there are additional questions, we can answer them then. When you start preparing to do a presentation, one of the things you want to do is get in touch with the person who will be running it, whether it's physical or virtual. What kind of video will you be using? And if it's virtual, what platform is it? I bring that up because the differences between Zoom and Skype and Teams and GoToWebinar and all the rest, you have different features available. So for example, Zoom allows you to do small groups, break up the entire attendee set into small groups. I don't believe that's available in GoToWebinar. Just understand which one they'll be using so that you know what features are available to you. Knowing what the venue will provide versus what you're expected to provide is also important. I will tend to go, if I'm going on site for a presentation, I'll actually bring multiple laptops. In some cases, my own sound system, depending on how large the group will be. I'll bring a projector, and I'll tend to bring a projector whether they say they'll have one or not. Because as we'll talk about in a few slides, having backups is really, really important. What do they want you to bring? Make sure you know that. Obviously, you'll need to bring your own presentation. And figure out if you're going to provide any printed or downloadable content for the students in advance. On this presentation, if you go to the Pound Slides channel, as Jason mentioned, you'll find the PDF of this presentation in there. I encourage you not to go too far ahead. There are a couple of points where I've got questions, and if you sneak ahead, you see the answers. But you're absolutely welcome to go and use this to refer to later. If you're going to a physical venue, know where the restrooms and the restaurants are nearby so that you can pass that along to students on the break. Whether it's physical or virtual, you do want to get access to that presentation space beforehand. You want some time to set up. We actually got going around noon, which was about an hour and 15 minutes ago, to check microphones, check video, work on lighting, make sure that everything's working. An hour and ahead seems like a long time, but if something goes wrong, it's really helpful to have that time to go and find a backup or a replacement or a new USB cable or whatever's needed. As a side note, if I know I'm moving to another time zone to give a presentation, I usually ask if I can go a day ahead, and it means one more hotel night and a little bit more food. My personal style is that my head doesn't work all that well if I'm landing. I've taken a red eye and I'm exhausted and I'm going to dive right into teaching. Doesn't always work well. So I usually ask for an extra day. The night before, try out your laptop with whatever the projection software will be or whatever the virtual meeting software will be. Make sure they work at all. Have a second laptop if needed. If you're going to do a recording, make sure that you can do a recording and download it afterwards so that it's available. I also tend to grab notes. So when I have a presentation, particularly one that someone else has written, I'll usually have some notes that I'll keep on the individual slides saying, oh, remember to include this story, or make sure you cover so-and-so on this slide. The night before is a good time to go through that, and I'll usually do that at dinner. This means that my head is in the game. I've been thinking about the presentation. I reviewed it within 24 hours of giving it, and all of these add up to a much more fluid presentation the next day. Make sure you get a good night's sleep, too. It's worth it. Are there particular events going on that are relevant to your talk? So, for example, if you're giving a talk on cooking chicken to a group of chefs, then is there, keep an eye out for the news. Was there a salmonella outbreak? Do you have to go and cover that as well as part of your presentation? Just one example. In the computer industry, there's always news coming out about new attacks and new viruses and new malware techniques and new software available to perform particular tasks. No shortage of things that you might need to cover. The morning of, make sure you have 3 different pieces of equipment that are going to give you an alarm. I've had more than one situation where someone I've been working with overslept and their alarm didn't go off, or they set it for PM instead of AM. Please have 3 different sources. If you can only find 2, Have a friend call you with plenty of time. Leave extra time on day one because you're not quite sure what's going to be there. If you need to get an extra cable or something, you've got enough time to do that. What do you bring? Well, first rule is make sure you have multiple ways to give the presentation. Multiple laptops. If you're going to do it with a cell phone, maybe with something like a Chromecast or something like that, make sure you have multiple ways to give it so that if one of them gives out, you can just switch to another. Make sure you bring the presentation in both PowerPoint and PDF form and put it into a thumb drive. Bring that with you. Never check the bag with your presentation hardware. I would gladly show up at a conference with just the clothes on my back and 3 laptops versus having a week's worth of clean clothes and no way to give the talk because my bag got rerouted to Anchorage yet again. Have a clock so that you know where you are. I've got a cell phone over to the side that I can review if needed. If you're going to be doing something in person, I like the flexibility to be able to move around the room. And so I'll bring along a remote control. They are operating system independent. So I don't need to have a particular driver. It'll work on Mac, Windows, Linux, or probably FreeBSD or anything else that recognizes a USB keyboard, which is everything. Make sure you have spare batteries for everything. If you don't have spare batteries, this is a time to go out and get a couple. Bring them with you because batteries will die at the least opportune moment. If you make sure you have handouts, whether they're physical or virtual, if it's a PDF, make sure there's a URL that people can pull them down. I also tend to bring backup internet connection. I'm mentioning the Skyroam not because I think this is the only product that will do it. This one's nice because it's a Wi-Fi access point and it's a cellular gateway. It's also virtual. There's no physical SIM card I have to put in here. They're virtual SIM cards. When I get to a country and I say I need an internet connection because the internet connection here at my presentation site is down, this will actually go out and find a local provider, sign up for 24 hours worth of service for $5 or whatever it is, and then I've got a limited amount of data transfer, but it works. And this is so valuable as a backup in case you need to pull slides down from the internet or you need to grab something quickly and you don't have an internet connection. For laser pointer, some of you may have noticed that the Keyspan remote that I mentioned earlier has a laser pointer built into it. They're terrible. The power that you get out of a watch battery isn't really enough to make an effective laser pointer. So what I suggest you do is get a much more powerful one that runs off a couple of AAAs. And it means I have 2 things to carry around a physical room. That's okay. I can put them in my pocket, leave them there. I usually actually just keep this in my hand and then just grab the laser pointer if I need to grab it for something. Make sure you've got power for everything. I did actually show up at a conference in Boston at one point and left the power adapter for my laptop at home. That is now absolutely part of my packing list every single time I go anywhere. And having a little bit of water available, absolutely worth it. You should be taking regular breaks to grab just a short drink. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
One reminder is that you don't have your webcam on, so if you're showing anything to the audience, we cannot see it.
That would be far better. You know, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. I'll switch briefly. Let me just go back and real quick show you. This is the Keyspan remote that I was talking about. The USB plugs into just any laptop with any operating system, and it's easy to carry around. And when I was talking about the laser pointer, this is just a much more powerful one than you'd find in the remote. The Skyroam unit looks like a hockey puck now. This is an older model, and this is the one that has a virtual SIM that you can use. It gives you 24 hours versus of internet access. Jason, thank you very much. I hadn't paid attention to that. I just assumed everybody could see me because I could see me. When you get there, first thing in the morning, especially the first day, set up your equipment first thing. Get everything laid out, whether it's physical or virtual. Make sure all of the equipment works. One trick I found is especially when you're working with a projector that you haven't used before, turn your laptop totally off. Connect up the projector, let the projector come up first, and then turn the laptop on. I found it's much more likely to work correctly and have good sync if you do it in that order. Make sure that you've got backups for everything, and that means all the hardware you're going to need. I bring along 2 laser pointers, 2 remotes, 2 laptops at a minimum. I had the Canadian Customs pull me aside for about 45 minutes because they thought because I had 3 laptops, I was coming up to Montreal to sell them on the black market. And if you'd taken a look at those laptops, they wouldn't have pulled in $5 each. But have backups. Also turn off anything that's going to beep. I usually ask this of my attendees at a physical location as well. It's not that people can't take calls, but they should, if they need to step out of the room, a vibrate is enough to go and let them know something's going on without distracting the rest of the class. About 45 minutes ahead, make sure that your mic and any video are working fine and take a quick restroom break. And then, once all of that is out of the way, then you get a chance to chat with everybody. What do you want to learn? Why are you here? What's your experience level? Are there any particular things that you wanted to cover today? Just say hi to everybody. Get a sense of who they are, why they're here, what their background level is. You've got a much more interesting talk if you can take a little time to get to know your attendees. So that's why I suggest you get there early so you have enough time to be able to chat with people at the end. The visual presentation is there to back up your voice. I want to have something that anybody can look at. And as I'm using just normal bullet points, which are usually death by PowerPoint. But the idea is that if you're not interested in what I'm saying, you can look up at the screen, get a sense of what I'm covering. You've got 2 ways to get into people's heads. If I have a presentation and I have nothing to show, then there's no option to get that information in 2 different ways. So come up with something. If you want to do bullet points, if you want to do just pictures, if you want to have memes all the time that are applicable to what you're saying, if you want to put up a flip chart and do it on paper, that's great. Just have something to show. Ideally, you've got something with a large font. Remember that even though you may be able to read it clearly, the people at the back of the room may not. And if somebody's watching a virtual presentation on a cell phone, the fonts can get so small that it's really frustrating. So use a large font. Don't try to fit a lot of words on the screen. These should be reminders, and we'll talk some more about that later. Where do you keep it? On your laptop, online, and in your pocket. Make sure you always have it with you. And then even if all of your bags disappear and all of your equipment's there, you've still got it on a flash drive in your pocket. Make sure you can download it from the internet and you've got any passwords you need to make that happen, and have a backup plan if something goes wrong. I did the first hour and a half of one presentation on nothing but a printed book because my laptop had died and I didn't have a backup. I asked an attendee, can I borrow your book and would you mind looking on with somebody else? And the attendee said, that's fine. And I'm holding up this book and walking through and telling people when to move to the next page. It's better than nothing. And luckily, somebody at the event was kind enough to get me a spare laptop at the first break. If your presentation bag disappeared for whatever reason, could you still do the talk? You need to be able to answer yes to that at some point. So, what do you give out? At the very least, you should give out an outline of what you're going to cover. Now, I tend to give out the entire PDF, and you can find that in the Slides channel, #slides of Discord right now. Go ahead and follow along there if you'd like. Use it as reference if you want later. Maybe if you're giving a talk, maybe you just kind of quickly skim through and say, are there any things that I forgot? Use it as a set of hints for you. You may not want to do that, and that's fine. It depends on the material you're giving and whether you're being paid for it. Whatever works for you is fine. One thing to note is that all presentation packages I've used have both the main presentation window, which is what you're looking at right now, but they also have what are called speaker notes. You can use those literally as speaker notes, or you can go down into that section and write out longhand a block of text that basically covers what you are going to say. So what's the reason for that? One of the reasons is that you can make the presentation available to somebody who couldn't make it live. Whether this is valuable to you or not, keep in mind it's a lot of work to do the initial writing and to keep it up to date. But in some cases, that's valuable. If you have labs, either individual software packages, virtual machines, access to cloud servers, send the information out early. Give people instructions on how to set it up. And the unfortunate part of that is they won't. I'm not annoyed at this. It just is the case that there will always be people who come to the presentation and with 25 minutes to go think they'll have plenty of time to download a 4 gig virtual machine image, set it up, do all the troubleshooting, and be ready to go. It's okay, but I do set a rule that if presentation is about to start, I can't give you help anymore on how to keep it going. We'll talk a little bit about having a volunteer or assistant. This is the time when they can take over and help people who are having trouble with the install. We have a number of volunteers who've taken time to join us today. Thank you all. And they're the ones in the background answering questions. Let people know what the prerequisites are. If there aren't any, that's great. But if you say in the course description, make sure that you have the software set up and you have the ability to run commands at the Linux command line, or you can SSH to your virtual server, or you can VNC into your cloud server. Make sure people know what those are so that they understand whether they're ready or not. If you're going in person, make sure the projector will work with your laptop, and that may mean that you have to buy some type of external converter. I tend to bring along DVI, HDMI, and even a VGA output because I don't know what the projector will have. Try to bring those along. We talked about the presentation remote. If you need to bring your own audio, that's pretty uncommon. Most venues will provide that. Laser pointer, bring along one that's better than you get in the remote, and have backups for everything that you absolutely need to be able to do the presentation, along with batteries and power cords. And as I'll mention again, if you're going overseas, make sure you understand what you need to provide power when the wall outlet changes and it's maybe 220 or 240 volts. The venue should be able to tell you whether you and your students will have internet access and have a backup if you need it. If it's virtual, make sure you've got a stable internet connection. Shut down everything you don't need. No downloads, no patching, no backups going on. I turned off my 2 NAS units because they are actually within earshot of my microphone, and just that little extra hum is more than could comfortably handle. Good quality webcam, mic, and additional lighting. If you look down at the end of the presentation, we have some links to possibilities. They're certainly not the only ones you could get, but they're ones that we've found here that work very well for us. Have a quiet room. This is why my wonderful little Chihuahua is off at puppy daycare, because there's a point where he will get hungry and he'll start barking at me. And as much as I love the little guy, I owe you my time, not him at the moment. Try to come up with breaks if you're going more than 2 hours. Have a planned time of somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. 10 minutes is really the minimum you should give. 5 if you're really behind schedule, but 10 minutes gives people a chance for a quick break and maybe another drink of some kind. Have a snack if it's appropriate. When you use the facilities, make sure you always leave a remote control mic on the laptop keyboard. Plenty of movies I think you can come up with where people forgot to do that. The only time I've had to change the normal break schedule was actually in a Muslim country where they have prayers 5 times a day. So we actually worked our classroom breaks around that, and it worked just fine. All right, got an exercise for you. What I'm going to do is give you a quick challenge. I want you all to do this individually. I'd like you to think about 5 to 10 bullet points that you would use when you're giving a talk on cooking chicken. Now, if you're vegetarian, change that to squash anytime I say chicken. And what I'd like you to do is write those down. I'm not going to give you any more details. I'm going to start a timer here for 60 seconds, and I'll be back with you after you've written those down. Okay. What was hard about that? Was there any part of that set of instructions that you were like, wait a second, this doesn't quite work? This is where in a physical room I'd ask people to raise hands. I don't have access to the chat right now, but I'm going to short circuit the answer to that. What was hard about that is cooking chicken is a topic, not a talk. What I was wondering was, how do you do this if you don't know what facet of the topic to talk about? How do you do this if you don't know who you're talking to? How do you plan a talk if you don't know their experience level, what they already know, and what they don't know? So I want you to think about how this talk would be different if you were giving it to classically trained French chefs, kindergarten students, line cooks, retirees, college students, and the sales meeting for the Purdue Chicken Company. Could you write one presentation that you could give to all of those? No, you can't. And the reason is, even though they might all have the title of cooking chicken, you can't figure out what to present until you know the audience's experience level, what kind of things they already know, what kind of things they don't know, what they're interested in. If you don't have those, you can't plan out a talk. It's possible you might be able to take a bare outline and apply it to a couple of those groups, but not to all of them. So this is why I bring up the idea that when you've got a topic, that's easy, but now you need to get down to what facet do we want to cover? What particular item am I going to help them understand today? The organizer may have a good sense of what that is. If you've got somebody who's trying to contract with you to present, they probably have a sense of what they want you to do. If worst case, ask the audience. Actually get in touch and say, what kind of things would you like to know about this topic? And based on all of that, you'll get a sense of how long the talk needs to be. A very basic introduction could be anywhere from a half hour to an hour. When you get into some more technical detail, it's probably an hour or two. If you're really trying to cover a topic from end to end with every possible facet, you're looking at a day or more. Now, once you've got that facet in hand, you need to write the material. Everybody's writing style is different, so I'm not going to try to say that I understand this in a way that's going to work for everybody. But I will say that I find it easiest to start off in a format of an outline. I try to take the major bullet points that I'm going to want to cover, and I put them as the titles to individual PowerPoint slides. Then I can fill it in with bullet points, images, something that makes it fun. And my goal is that what I put on the slide is the minimum I need to remind myself of what I'm going to cover. I put up phrases, not sentences. I never put up the actual words I'm going to read. I want to be able to do something different than what's on the slide and add to it. I'm not there to mimic what's there. As a side note, when you're doing the material, we really do encourage dark text on a light background. You can do things like trying to do light gray text on a black background, and what you're going to find is that people are going to be squinting. People with eye problems can't read it at all. If you've got a bright sunlit room, you may not be able to read it even if your eyes are in perfect shape. So as much as it's boring to present this way, it's the easiest one to use, and this is why it's used so commonly. As I said before, the speaker notes, you decide how you want to use those. You can leave it totally blank. You can put it in as a replacement for the text you're going to be saying, or literally speaker notes. A number of remote control packages for presentations allow you to carry around your cell phone. They show the current slide, they show the next slide, and they show the speaker notes while the presentation, the current slide obviously, is being shown up on the projector or the virtual presentation software like GoToWebinar. It's helpful sometimes to do that. I tend not to encourage people to spend their entire presentation day looking down at their cell phone. Hopefully you've got enough information on the slide in front of you to be able to figure out what you're supposed to say rather than having to look it up each time. If you are going to use that, try to put in just very short phrases that are just enough to remind you to say what you need to cover. When you've got the material ready, you need to do a couple of things. First of all, send it through tech review, somebody who knows the subject. I've had this presentation go by two people that I trust very much, who have done lots of presentations, and I got some great feedback, things that I'd missed, things I'd gotten wrong, things that made the material much, much better, and I really appreciate the reviewers' help. If you're not a native speaker of the language you're going to be using, please have somebody go through and check grammar and language. It's a good idea in any language, but especially if you're going to be writing a presentation in Bulgarian and you only speak Hungarian, this is your chance to have somebody really check it for accuracy. Finally, flow. I actually moved, I think, about 10 slides around yesterday afternoon because the flow didn't make sense for the presentation. And finally, have somebody test the labs, make sure that your instructions actually work. And if that person can start off with a system that doesn't have anything installed on it and use that as a starting point, that makes it much more likely that you're going to find any missing steps that work fine on your system because you've got everything installed, but the person testing it did not. Now, learn the material. Actually sit down and walk through it. If you write a set of slides yourself and you're going to present it, it's going to fit naturally. What you have on the slides and what you were going to say are a nice matched pair. If you're presenting somebody else's slides, spend more time on this, because at every slide, your question is going to be, what can I add to this to help students understand what's there? What can I give? We'll talk about what those different things are in just a moment. But you should have on every slide something you can add that makes the presentation more interesting, more relevant, more clear, helps the student understand how these items go together. If you're having trouble with a particular slide, use the speaker notes. Actually put things down that you can use for reminders later. I got to tell you one story. Another person and I were asked to fill in for an instructor who had a family emergency one day. And we alternated. He did the odd numbered modules. I did the even numbered modules. And at each module, each of us would switch so that the person who wasn't speaking could actually sit down and learn this material. Neither of us had ever seen it before that day. And if you're looking for a train wreck, you're about to get it. I had one slide, the title was Elliptic Curve Cryptography. And I remember looking up at the slide, taking a look at the bullet points, looking down at my speaker notes, looking back up on the slide, and finally turning to the audience and saying, I have absolutely no idea what elliptic curve cryptography is. So this was a point where I could have tried to bullshit. I could have tried to, claim that I knew something. I could have made up something different, but I was honest. I said, I have no idea what this is, and I'll make you a deal. I'm going to find out at lunch what this is, and I'm going to come back with something useful. I find it's far better to be honest and say what I don't know and fill in that gap later than try to say something that my audience will understand. So, what am I going to contribute? The first thing I can do is help people understand how this fits into the topic. What's important? What can people kind of skip by? When I've got individual items to talk about, I can give a real-life example like that elliptic curve cryptography story. I can tell people how I use a piece of software. I can show demos how to use the software. I can talk about individual products that are relevant to this topic. I can use a personal story. Opinions aren't great. Opinions are easy, and if they are supportable, maybe, but try to stick to facts. If a demo kind of gets the idea across, but really the student needs to see this live, then it's time to switch over to a lab format. Give them something that they can actually use to try this out. Worst case, if you decide that the cost of a lab in terms of time and effort needed to install it is just not enough, go for screenshots and actually walk people through it. It's not a cop-out at all. You've given people information on what the product will do, but you've tried to keep the cost of getting that software installed as low as possible. Screenshots are the easiest way to do that. Every point in the presentation, you should be saying to yourself, how can I help the students understand this material to be able to move forward? Your voice. I want to speak clearly and professionally. I should be using terms that are easy to understand rather than trying to go and use tons of acronyms to make myself sound important. That's not my goal. I want to make things clear. If you know you're going to be in a large room or you're going to be doing a virtual presentation, get a good quality microphone. Make sure you've got an audio system that works. Have somebody there to set it up if you're not confident on how to do this. If you're in a large room, don't skip the microphone and yell. It's the easiest way to burn your voice out within a day or two if you're doing a week-long course. Try to have amplification when you need it. On the slide, there's a link to a YouTube video on varying speed and pitch. Now, I encourage you to go watch this later. It's humorous, but it's got a little bit of point to it. I should be able to talk slowly and clearly when I need to get the point across on a complicated topic. I can talk fast and enthusiastic when I'm really thrilled about something that I want to just get through quickly so I can get to the meat. When I get a point where I can take a break, I take it. Grab some water, give your voice a rest. I've seen a number of instructors who tend to not hang out in the class at breaks and at lunch and before and after because their voices really need to recover. So don't feel embarrassed if you can't hang around afterwards for an hour and talk to people if your voice isn't really going to handle that. Tea with lemon and honey, surprisingly, is really good, whether you need the caffeine or not, at helping your voice recover when it's having trouble. Also, if there are audience questions, it gives me a break and gives me a chance to listen. The one thing you do want to avoid is reading from a script. We had a potential presenter come and send over a short presentation that as a way of showing that he could present effectively to an audience. And I think he was about 15 or 20 seconds in when it was very clear he was reading from a script. The problem with that is that you are locked into that text. And even if you feel that there's some other content that you want to cover, or you want to be able to change how the presentation works, or there's some additional topic you want to go to, if you have everything written out and scripted, it's hard to break away from that. You can look robotic. It doesn't mean you absolutely have to. Some people can pull it off, but it's not the best way to do it. I would really encourage you to, instead of trying to read from a script, just get comfortable working off bullet points and presenting that way, because it doesn't feel authentic to your audience. Also, when you're writing it out that way, there's an unfortunate tendency to use very formal language with lots of syllables. I'm trying to keep things simple and easy to understand, because my first job is to the audience, to help people understand what's there, rather than trying to make myself sound important. The hardest lesson I had for probably the first 5 times I ever presented was I have to cover everything on the slide. I have to say everything about every bullet point. You can't do that. And the primary reason is, in almost every case, you're going to run over on time. If I feel like I've got to say something about every single bullet point, the day is going to run long. Just get used to that idea. So I have no problem saying I'm going to cover some of these and I'm not going to cover all of them. It gives me more time to focus on the particular slides that have relevant, useful content, rather than feeling I must say something just about a bullet point because it's on the slide. Practice. Come up with the time to actually walk through as many of these steps as you can. The easiest way to go through a presentation at first is to record anywhere from 5 to, say, no more than 15 minutes with a video camera. Now, the interesting part is you don't just turn it on and watch it. You're going to watch it 3 ways. 1, turn off the video and only listen to yourself with audio for your presentation after you've recorded it. What that will teach you is, how is your voice coming across? How is this presentation going to be for someone who can't get a video feed? Is it presentable? Does it feel like you're doing a good job with just audio? Now, turn off the audio and just turn on the video. Can you watch this person? Do you believe that they're enthusiastic about the topic? Are they smiling? Are they engaging? Does this person make me feel like I want to learn more just from watching them? And finally, turn both audio and video on and watch it one more time and get a sense whether everything comes together as you want. You should be able to look at yourself and judge, am I giving a presentation that makes people enthusiastic about the topic? Am I sharing the technical information that I need to? You should be able to answer yes to those before you actually step in front of a camera. Giving a talk to your dog, frankly, it's a great way to go. A dog in particular will very happily look up at you like this is the most interesting thing he or she has ever heard. And maybe they're thinking, when is he going to give me a treat? But they will still pay attention. And so if you're trying to work on eye contact, if that's something that's uncomfortable for you, start with a pet. I'm quite serious about that. Don't do the whole talk, but do it with a dog. Cats, I love cats, but they'll just walk away. They're really not there to go with and listen to you talk, so that's not quite as good. Next, work with a friend that doesn't know this particular topic area, a coworker, someone that you met on Discord at the Wild West Hacking Fest Discord, someone else that you can go through the talk with, and they will give you constructive feedback at the end on what you did well and what you didn't, and then give them the same courtesy. Let them go through a presentation they're doing, and you give them constructive criticism, help them improve their presentation as well. If you have user groups in your area, a group that's interested in this particular topic, they will always take speakers. So if you're running a presentation that you know is going to be to your company or to your customers or your prospects or to an industry conference, and you just want to have a dry run, user group will always take a presentation. So it's a good way to go and practice the presentation, make sure it works, and get feedback. Every time you do it, treat it like it's the final presentation. Show up with respect, respectful clothing, give the talk as best you possibly can, and then be willing to learn for the next time you give it. For those of you who may be listening with just audio, there's a little voice in your head that says, you are an idiot. You don't know this slide or topic. Listen to that voice, then do everything you can to prove it wrong. John Strand, he's absolutely right. There's no reason why you can't present on a technical topic. You just have to learn to just quietly ignore the doubts in your own head. I still get concerns before presenting, and I've done this for 20 years, guys. But the nice part is I've gotten to a point where I can ignore those thoughts, and I can go ahead and do these presentations. So, when you get the material already and you're comfortable, do a dry run where you actually do the presentation. Yesterday afternoon I did this, and it took me about an hour and 50 minutes to do a presentation that needs to fit into 2 hours. If you'll notice in the lower right, we're numbering the slides. And so the beautiful part is I know I've got somewhere around 65 slides to present, and we're a little over halfway through. Now, the nice part is that means that I am not ahead of schedule, but at least I'm not behind. It gives us some more time to do questions at the end. It gives us more time to do questions at any point, which is wonderful. One thing you can do, one trick is, in your slide deck, you should have a couple of slides where, especially towards the end of the day, where you can do two forms. A short form, that's where if you're running late, you know you can cover it quickly, not rushed, but you can go over the material steadily and move on to the next slide. But you also have some slides where you feel like you could get into some more detail. So depending on whether you're ahead of schedule or behind schedule, you can pick how you're going to do the presentation on those slides, and then either fill out the time if you are running ahead, or you can go and shorten the amount of time given to each of those slides if you're running behind. When you actually talk to, especially a live room full of people, you're not talking to a group. You get a chance to talk to individuals. You should be having one-on-one conversations with them. Look people in the eye. Share part of your technical presentation. Make sure that they are understanding it by watching the facial expressions, and then move on to somebody else. When people ask questions, look them in the eye. Make sure that you are giving them the answer that they need, and measure their expression to let you know whether they got it or not. If they didn't, try it again. Go back through the presentation. Go back through that concept and try it once more. You should be able to tell whether the people in your audience are getting it and you can just keep moving on, or if they're looking at you with squinty eyes and tilted heads and glazed expressions, which means that they didn't understand your explanation of elliptic curve cryptography any more than you did. So take the time to make sure everybody understands. If you had some discussion before the class, you may have already had time to understand whether there are particular problems that the students are trying to solve, and that's why they showed up. And so this is your chance to kind of measure your presentation and say, am I addressing those needs? Are they getting the information that they wanted? If you're on a virtual presentation, what kind of questions are coming in? Is there a theme to those? Are a lot of people asking about fill in the blank here? And if so, you may want to kind of take a diversion. I'll commonly take anywhere from 3 to 15 minutes, a couple of times a day in a long class, and say, okay, we're going to let the slides go for a minute. I'm going to show you a demo of how to use this other tool that isn't in the presentation, because so many of you have been looking for a tool like this. It's a great chance to go and address the particular questions that people have. Was there something that showed up in the news recently that's relevant to this topic? It's a far more useful presentation than simply saying, hey, here's a canned slide deck, enjoy the presentation, I'm not going to try to make it relevant. When you're presenting, you do run the risk of having people at the far ends of the experience scale. So you've got people who have not used this particular topic, this particular tool or operating system or technique before, and they're struggling. They are commonly the people who can't get the software installed in advance simply because they use a different OS. I'm trying not to be a bigot about any particular OS. You know, you take somebody who's grown up with operating system 1 and then you hand them operating system 2, and it's a struggle. But when you have somebody who shows up without that background, then they're struggling just to get the software installed or get the labs prepared or run commands at all without actually getting to the point where they can learn anything. And that's a real shame. So a couple of things that you want to do. One is, first off, send out the prerequisites that say, we hope that you are comfortable doing fill in the blank here before the class starts. And that's not to say that somebody who isn't comfortable with that can't attend, but it helps them understand how they're going to best get something out of the day. And that's really the goal. Make sure that you explain things clearly. Walk through step by step. Don't use acronyms if it's not really, truly universally understood. I think USB is a safe one, but you can think of certainly, SCADA may not be immediately obvious to people who don't work in the power industry. You should be ready to rephrase something. And what I'm saying is, don't ask the class, hey, does everybody get that? We'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you see glazed eyes, immediately say, let me try that once more, and say it in a different way that's hopefully clearer. If somebody still needs help, then you can use the break, lunch, before or after class as a chance to help them out with individual topics. If you've got a monitor or mentor or volunteer or lab assistant or somebody else who can help out, then they can help out with the questions as well and help that student get going while you continue on with the presentation. At the other end of the scale, there's a little bit of a risk with people who are very, very familiar with the topic, which is fine, but also feel the need to be boastful or show what they know or prove to the rest of the class that they're smarter. And only when you get to that level does this become a problem. So one of the easiest ways to address that is to make sure that the attendees, when they raise their hand and they ask questions, make sure they're questions. That should be part of it. It's okay to show off what you know, but this isn't the right setting for that. So really try to stay focused on questions. If somebody starts to get disruptive and they start to monopolize the presentation time, you should be able to tell that other people are getting annoyed and that you need to do something about it. One of the best ways is maybe just to talk privately to that person at the break and be prepared to ask them to leave if they continue to be disruptive. I'll be honest, this is rare. This really doesn't happen all that much. I just want you to be ready for if it happens, have some way of addressing it. All right. So here's one of my favorites, filler words. You can have somebody who talks for 5 to 10 seconds and never actually says something. Well, but there's and kind of, but in if you, well, kind of. If I use words like that, their role in speech is to hold your place, to say, I don't want anybody to jump in. I'm going to try to hold the airwaves until I think of what's coming next. And the problem is it makes you sound tentative. It makes you seem less authoritative rather than more. I'm here as a speaker. I can take a pause for 15 seconds and I still get to be the speaker. I don't have to do that anymore. So the way to fix this, I'm going to use a glass jar and an assistant. You get that person to come over and listen to you talk for anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes. And they're going to have a glass jar down on the ground, and you're going to hand them 2 rolls of dollar coins. And the deal is, every time you make a filler word, use a filler word in your presentation, they're going to take one of those coins and they're going to drop it into the glass jar from at least 2 feet up. And here's how it sounds. So I'm going to give a presentation. And the idea is that every single time you do this, that sound is going to come back and give you an aversive response. It's going to teach you that that's not a good thing. Once you've gone through 5 or 10 minutes, you'll have something that's training you that you're using filler words that aren't necessary. And the deal is also that any dollar coins that end up in that glass jar go to your assistant at the end of the presentation. So you're paying for them to listen to you, or maybe you're paying for the first round of drinks that night. Either way, it really does work rather well, but you need a person there to help you out with the process. Butterflies, don't worry about them. Seriously. They commonly show up because none of us really grow up with the idea that we can talk to an audience of large numbers of people. Our brains just don't like that. My hat is off to anybody who doesn't have this, but I think you talk to most public speakers and you'll find out that they either had butterflies when they first started or maybe still do every single time. So don't let it override the rest of your brain. Acknowledge that it happens and don't stress over it. The best thing I can do is to learn the material. Once I know the material, it's much easier to avoid the butterflies or ignore them. If I've practiced and practiced, I feel comfortable with material, and then there's less stress about, is somebody going to know that I don't know this stuff? So this is why I gave this presentation yesterday. For people who are just on audio and can't see the video, the picture on the slide is Carrie Fisher saying, stay afraid, but do it anyway. What's important is the action. You don't have to wait to be confident. Just do it, and eventually the confidence will follow. So that's wonderful words from someone who probably had butterflies for a good part of her professional life. Don't talk to 20 people at once. Make it a one-to-one conversation. Can I talk to one person in my audience? Can I picture one person if I'm using a virtual platform like GoToWebinar? Can I have a conversation with that person and explain these concepts to that one person? And then move on and talk to somebody else and talk to somebody else. It's much easier to have a one-to-one conversation than it is to imagine all the people out there that are listening to you or seeing all the people out there. One trick is to have a curtain or a door that you talk to. Here's how it works. I take my presentation, maybe put it on a cell phone just for portability, and I walk up to a curtain between myself and another room, or a French door, or an actual door, and I give 3 to 5 minutes of the presentation twice. The first time, I imagine that there are 40 people behind that door who can hear me as I talk. The second time, I give the same presentation, but I imagine there's nobody there. If you think about it, it's the same presentation. It's the same venue. I see the same things. Do I have more stress when I imagine that there are people behind that door versus when there aren't? And that's just butterflies. It's not something you can totally get rid of by choice, but by practice, you can. We want to set up labs with a couple of goals. The point of a lab is to give a student the chance to see a particular tool or technique or process in action. But the cost of the lab is the time needed to install it, the amount of commands that are needed, the number of ways that the install can screw up, the number of prerequisites you have to have in order to make that lab work. You want to maximize the benefit while minimizing the costs. So ideally, when you're getting a lab over to a student, the amount of commands that they need to run to get it installed is short and simple, and there are very few prerequisites. And the light bulb moment that they get at the end of doing this lab is something that is enlightening and fantastic, and wow, I didn't even know you could do that, versus the other direction where it's a lot of effort to install and very little light bulb moment. Try to focus on those if you can. When you're giving students software to install, one of the things that you should try to do is come up with free software. Free as in cost, although open source and free software and movement type software are also good. If you can't come up with a free package to accomplish a task, at the very least there should be a time-limited demo. You don't want to require students to have to buy a package in order to do a lab. If you have to do something like that and there's a package that they could have paid for, but there's a similar free package that gives most of the light bulb moment, go for the free one. You don't have to use the industry standard if there's something comparable where people can learn from. There's a question about whether you space all the labs out and attach them really to the section where you did the presentation, or do you grab all the labs and put them at the end of the slide deck and then tell the students, hey, you know, we've finished the main presentation. Now you've got all the time in the world to do all of the labs. I'll be here until everybody's done, and I'll be here to answer questions. I tend to like that last one a little bit more. One, if people do have something that they have to go to and they really need the extra time, they can say, great, I'll do the labs later at home. Two, if you put the labs with the section that they cover, and you have anywhere from 4 to 6 labs during a day, and they're all spread out, the danger is that some people are going to finish quickly, and some are still going to be working when the 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes are up. But if you group them all together at the end of the day, then people can work at their own pace. They don't have to stop halfway through a lab because they're taking a long time to finish it, and you have to keep going with the talking. So there's no one answer to that, but I tend to encourage people to put the labs at the end of the day all together. You should also ask yourself, is this a lab that a student could do out of class? And the answer is hopefully yes. At the very least, any lab that you do, you should be able to do on both Windows and Macintosh because you'll get both in your student population. If they can also be run under Linux, that's great. I tend to be a Linux enthusiast, and so I'm always happy when we can come up with something that will run under all three, but the first two are the most common ones that you'll see. If you put in the class prerequisites, here are the operating systems we expect you to have, and here are the ones we support, but you're welcome to come in and use other operating systems if you feel you'd like to, then you've made it clear what students should come up with, and those that are willing can come up with those exact operating systems, and somebody else who feels like they want to use a different one certainly can. If at all possible, install software from a package. Try not to ask people to download and compile a piece of software unless there's literally no other way to make it happen. It's fine for developers. It's not a great call for end users, and it may be not allowed on some computers because of company or agency policy. So if it's a package that you can get right from the operating system manufacturer, that's great. If it's a package you can pull down of some form, that's great. Compiling is not the best call unless there's really no other option. When you do the setup instructions, make sure you say what's required already on the system and maybe tell people how to get those prerequisites if they don't already have them. Give step-by-step instructions. Here's how you actually do the installation. And if you know that there are common pitfalls, like if you see this error, this means that virtualization is not turned on in your BIOS. Please reboot your system, hit F12 or whatever key it is to get into BIOS setup, turn off virtualization, and try again. Those kinds of answers are great for a fact document or a wiki or a Google Doc or a PDF that you can update. Make sure there's enough time before class for people to do it, and also a way to test that everything is installed correctly, even something as simple as the name of my package -- version. Some way to tell that the software is installed and has the right libraries and is operating correctly so that people can know they are all set and can move on. If you get to a point where the class has to start, see if there's a lab assistant who might be able to help stragglers. Okay. Now, once you've got a lab in place, have a beginner give this a try. Not somebody who's done this for a decade. Have somebody who's never used the package give the instructions a try on a blank system. You can use a cloud server for this and give them the login instructions and the VNC or SSH information needed to get there. You give them that and you say, here, follow these lab instructions and make sure that all the commands work. When they get to a point that they don't understand, they should be able to tell you, hey, this isn't working. What do I have to do here? Try to get some feedback from the attendees. Did the labs work? Were there parts that they couldn't execute? Were there parts where they had to do an additional step? And make sure you incorporate those changes into the next version of the lab. If you need to put up a fact page of some type to cover a particular error message that people are seeing that you didn't expect, that's absolutely fine for a temporary fix. Think about the size of the files you're going to be sending. remember that many people will download the labs at the last minute. Last minute meaning within 15 or 30 minutes of the class starting. So if you've got a massive set of files that need to come down, make sure you've got some type of content delivery network available for that so that your little 100 megabit connected web server is not driven into the ground by 1,000 people all downloading it in the same 15-minute time period. You can also put things onto a thumb drive, make sure that you write protect it, and remind people that I'm not making any promises that these are virus-free. It's better to download them, but have it as a backup in case the internet connection isn't available. What's the goal? Can I say with every individual lab, what do I want people to learn from this? Where's the light bulb moment? We want to make sure that that's clear. When you're actually putting a lab into your slides, we encourage 3 sections. The first is a very simple, terse description of what do you want somebody to do and what goal do you want them to reach. Put that on its own page. On a separate page, add some hints. And this can be 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 hints saying, hey, have you considered using this package? Or how would you read this particular file if you needed to from disk? Something that will give just enough of a nudge that somebody can say, yeah, that's right. Okay, I can try that. And finally, on a separate page, step-by-step instructions. What does somebody need to actually type to do the entire lab from end to end? The neat part is that given somebody's experience level, they may stop as soon as they've read the bare description and be able to do the whole lab. Others may need the hints. Others may need to see the actual step-by-step commands. It doesn't matter. Everybody can pick their own learning level and still get to the point of that light bulb moment, no matter how much experience they have with the topic. So this is while it takes a little extra time to set up each lab this way, it really gives your class a lot more flexibility on how they can all reach that light bulb, no matter what their background. If people are having a lot of trouble, do a live walkthrough. Actually show it up on the screen. Actually do the live lab yourself and make sure everybody can follow along. A 4th page might be an extra challenge. So for somebody who's finished the lab early, put in a couple extra credit questions. Hey, can you tell which machine was port scanning during this time period? Or how could I read this off of a packet capture file instead of an interface? And then somebody who's finished early can take time and answer the extra credit questions. We also encourage you to use something like a wiki or a shared document area, a Google Doc, something where people can add their own questions, suggestions, improvements, requests to fix typos, ideas, hints for each other, things to add to the next version of the lab document. All of these are things that you want to encourage people to take part in. And another one to do is to do a walkthrough of how to do the lab. Have individual videos for each lab that let somebody watch you do it. And so these can be kind of appended to the main presentation if you're putting up a recording of the talk. Thumbs up if it runs on multiple operating systems. If there's little background knowledge needed to do the lab, there's little setup. You don't need any additional hardware and maybe very little additional software. If the software comes from the operating system publisher, that's better. If people need to install it from a different source, that's fine. If it's free, that's awesome. Loaner and demo versions are also okay, but free is better. And can I actually see something? Do I learn something at the end when the lab is complete? If you can't do those, if one of those or more than one of those are just too hard, you may want to go and set up a virtual machine or a cloud server image that you can duplicate, or a laptop or some type of machine you bring along that people VNC or SSH into, instead of asking them to follow through a very long setup procedure. It seems a little bit like a cop-out, but think about it this way. Your goal is not to help people install software on their own computer. Your goal is there to help them reach that light bulb moment with the least amount of effort possible. And if that means I set up 35 clones of a cloud server that has the software pre-installed, and then I change the password so everybody gets their own cloud server to access, it gives the same light bulb moment, but it's a whole lot less effort. Focus on that part as opposed to, oh, I must make them put the software on their own computer. It's much better to focus on the light bulb. If I've got a piece of expensive hardware or software that I want to demo, I'll contact the manufacturer or publisher and ask them, can I get a demo version to bring in? And again, letting people see how that hardware or software works is really the goal. And so just being able to show them how the individual package works is well worth it. Most manufacturers will gladly send you a demo version anytime you give a class. If you're trying to analyze sample data, make sure that's in a file as opposed to trying to transmit packets on a live network connection. That's going to be way too much headache, and it's not a good call. Make sure your sample data is in a file. A beautiful way to do this is to have an adversarial lab where you've got a set of attackers and a set of defenders, and you're actually trying to go and see who can attack and who can defend their systems better, see how many flags that you can get off of your opponent's systems and so on. We won't get into how to set that up, but it's a fun way to make the students attack each other. Things will go wrong. So Bill will hold things up to his camera and thinks he's showing how to use a presentation remote and forgets the camera is entirely off. Apologies for that. When something goes wrong, say how you're going to fix it. What are you going to do right now to address the problem, and if that's not a full fix, when can I get you the full answer, or when can I send out the explanation that I just don't have at the moment? Explain that to the class, make sure you follow up, but move on from the issue. Don't keep mentioning it. It just happens. It's okay. If you've got somebody else who's on the call who can handle other issues, ask them if they'd be willing. Maybe the room's too warm and they need to go and check with a hotel receptionist to see if we could turn the temperature down a little. If you got more than 40 people, it's great to have at least one assistant who can take over stuff like that so you can keep talking. And finally, make sure you follow up. If you told people that you're going to find out what elliptic curve cryptography is, make sure you do, and make sure you get them that answer. One way you can avoid problems like that, make sure that you have backups. Do we have a second internet connection if needed? What if the power goes out? Do I have multiple copies of the talk in different places? Can I download it from the internet? If I can't give a live presentation, maybe I do a pre-recorded talk and I put that up on YouTube. That's better than nothing. So just be aware that you've got multiple ways to give a presentation. If you can't get to somewhere, your flight is canceled, virus shows up in 2020, make sure you've got multiple ways to do that and have backups. If you're not able to attend, is there a second presenter who could fill in for you? It's a little tougher, but make sure somebody else knows the material that could fill in if possible. Finally, have fun. If you can't show you enjoy it, you probably need to rethink your presentation. Am I talking about something I don't care about? That's a bad sign. Pick something you do care about and make sure that people understand you enjoy what you do and they should enjoy the topic as well. Show them the excitement. Show them what this tool can accomplish that they may not know about. Once you can get that enthusiasm done, it's far more important than the individual things you'll be showing them at a technical level. For answering questions, make sure you repeat the question. That's the biggest mistake I see people make, especially in person. When somebody asks a question in the front row, people in the back row can almost never hear what they say. So make sure you repeat the question. It gives you a couple more seconds to think about the answer. It's well worth it, and it really makes sense, especially in person, but in virtual as well. If you don't know the answer, no problem. Tell people when you'll have that answer for them. It's your responsibility to come up with those answers for relevant questions. Make sure that you do and you follow up. Getting students to share is really, really tough. If you think you've got butterflies standing in front of a class, they have the same ones in asking questions because it makes people feel like they're dumb. If I'm asking a question, oh, the rest of the class is going to know what I don't know. Well, it's really hard to encourage people to give questions, but you've got to encourage it as best you can. So, one way that's going to discourage it is if I say, did anyone not understand that? No one's going to answer that question, and I've automatically set up a barrier between me and my students. Nobody wants to admit they didn't understand it. If I rephrase that to, would it help if I rephrase that? That's a much better way because that takes the focus of this from them not knowing something to me not explaining it well enough. And then I get a chance to try it again. Keep an eye on people's eyes. Are people getting it? Are people sending in lots of questions on a virtual platform? Is everybody kind of glazed eyes or squinting at me saying, I don't understand? I should be able to monitor that and tell when I need to say something twice. It's your job to make a safe environment to make that happen. When you're talking about this, never focus on a person. And worse yet, a person who doesn't understand something. You need to focus on the technology. So the fact that somebody doesn't understand something, that's what you focus on. You never try to insult somebody and say, hey, you didn't get that? What's the problem? One nice thing about Discord is that you get to sign in with a pseudonym. So this gives you a chance to ask questions without feeling like people know it's you or your coworkers see you asking silly things. You can do this privately and quietly without having to attach it to yourself. So Discord is one of the reasons why we like that particular platform with pseudonyms. Above all, be honest. If I don't know something, I'm going to say it, and I'm going to work to make sure that I can get that answer and get it out to my students. You should be practicing your talk multiple times long before it shows up in front of a group. Please do. And remember, this is not your ego trip. This is not your day to prove that you are the most awesome guy in the world. Your job is to make sure that each of your students has some new things that they didn't know. Your job is to support them, to help them up, to bring them up to your level so that you can focus on other things later. Make sure you're focusing on your students' needs. Never belittle a student, especially publicly. Oh my gosh. If you have to say something to somebody, quietly saying, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we really have to move on with the class, do it quietly and privately if at all possible. Make sure you deal with disruptive students when they happen. The nice part is it doesn't happen all that often, but be prepared to do something active if you need to, and make sure you know the material. When you're done, make sure you've set up some place for the students to communicate afterwards. Classes used to be, we'll just show up, and then whether this is a half-hour class or a full week-long course that people have to fly into, when you're done, you're done. That's it. It doesn't have to be that anymore. So setting up a Discord server and Black Hills Active Countermeasures and Worldwide Hacking Fest have 3 separate ones available for this. Different discussion areas. We want you to be actively involved in helping each other and mentoring each other and asking us questions. We want to make sure that you've got a way to take part after the fact. Make sure you include some links to other sites that people can go to, things that they can look at, places to get more information about the topic in question. And we've got some at the end. You'll see those in just a minute. For feedback, a Google form is actually remarkably effective because you can include numerical, multiple choice, and free-form text answers. And when that form is filled in, you can bring all those records back in a spreadsheet format and learn from what they're saying. If you consistently get low scores on quality of labs, well, now you know where you need to spend your time between now and the next presentation because people aren't happy with those. Make sure you send that out to everybody who took part and learn from all of their suggestions. Also ask people to email you if they've found typos or mistakes in the material. No matter how many times you go over it and other people go over it, you're always going to miss something. And ask people if they'd like coverage of a different aspect of it. Send it in as an email so that you can think about what type of things people want to see. If you're going for an in-person presentation, make sure you include a presentation remote. Targus, the KeySpan was the one that I showed you. I'm not sure that's made anymore. Targus is another one. Make sure you test it with both your operating system and your presentation software on every platform where you plan to use it. As a general rule, the ones that are made today are driverless. They use the keyboard interface, and the worst case is on a Mac, it'll come up and say, hey, I don't recognize this keyboard. What is this? You basically just close that and ignore it. By and large, they tend to work pretty well, but please test it beforehand. Separate laser pointer we talked about. Mic and speakers if you're going to have more than maybe 60 students in a class, and batteries for everything. You should literally have a spare battery for everything you are bringing. Make sure you have adapters so that if people have different types of video for a projector on an on-site presentation, you can accommodate that. And if you're going overseas, remember that you may not only need an adapter to fit the wall outlet, but make sure each device you need to plug in can handle 110 to 240 volts, 50 and 60 hertz, or you have a converter for any devices that cannot handle that entire range of power. We've got some examples of types of things that work well. These are literally the things I'm using right now. A Razer webcam is currently turned off, but we'll turn that back on in a minute. The Blue Yeti microphone is what I've got off to my right. I'm using an earpiece, so it's not quite as obvious that I have audio being fed back to me. And because the particular room that I'm in is a little bit dark, I'm using a pair of LED lights that help make it a little easier to see. Before we get to just kind of closing thoughts, I did want to thank everybody who's made this possible. Chris and John and my wife Deb all contributed some ideas to this presentation and made it a lot better than the original format. Keith and Jason, Velda, Deb, thank you so much for taking part today, and everybody who's answering questions behind the scenes. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to leave up this slide while we finish up as some additional resources that you can use. I think these books and the TED Talk down at the bottom are all very positive ones. They'll give you some ideas of presentation formats and tips and techniques, things that I haven't covered here very much. I think you'll learn a lot from them. The nice part is we've actually finished a little bit ahead of schedule. If you've got questions, I'm very happy to cover them now. I'll leave this slide up. And by the way, those links that you have, Amazon a couple slides back, you don't have to buy them from Amazon, but if you download the PDF, those are clickable links in that as well, so that long after this talk is done, you can still find those particular products. Jason and Keith, how are we doing for questions?
Hey, Bill.
Hey, yeah.
My first question for you is, what are your thoughts on professional organizations such as Toastmasters?
As a way to practice your talk, I love that idea. Am I right in thinking that you can sign up to with a talk that you want to give, and you simply go in and present to the rest of the group?
So I'm a part of Toastmasters. We meet monthly, so you can go to the Toastmasters website. You can do a search based on your zip code. Every single Toastmasters follows a simple formula of, introduction, this, that, and I would say you would have to potentially attend a few meetings before you gave a talk, and they have a certain pathway down for what types of talks you can give. So I don't think you can just stop in and practice one,
Right.
but you can join, and then they have different types of talks you give, and one of them could be the talk that you have coming up, and say, would it be possible if I could give this?
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. And I would heartily encourage any venue that gives you a chance to actually stand up in front of people and try out presenting. It literally doesn't matter what the material is, whether it's something that's critical to you and you've just written, or whether it's just a fun set of slides that somebody hands you and says, here, present this. The getting up in front of an audience and doing that presentation is the important part. Practicing is the important part. The actual material is not the core thing that matters. It's getting time in front of an audience.
Question from Cactus from Discord. Do you have to adjust for giving talks to neurodiverse audiences versus neurotypical?
Something diverse. What was the word, please?
Neurodiverse. So I believe that's like an autistic audience or other. I'm not 100% sure what falls into that, but neurodiverse versus neurotypical audiences.
Apologies. There we go. Absolutely. And I don't want to belittle any audience, but if you think about how you would present to a group of kindergarten students, how you would make your words simpler, how you would keep the content a lot lower level to get core concepts across. Absolutely. I don't know how to do that myself. And so I can't give you any hints on how that's done or what you need to do differently. But I agree that the presentation will be a different style, and it needs to be tuned for your listening audience. I 100% agree.
Any other questions? Currently, I'm not seeing any.
I see one from Discord from Thomas L., and he was asking for you, Bill, over your 20 years, is there one that stands out that like totally went off the rails that you were able to learn from that experience and, kind of change your methods after that?
Absolutely, yes. I'm happy to say it wasn't specifically my mistake. There was a presentation where I was in the speaker room because I wasn't presenting that day, and we started getting notes from the room monitor that something was not going right in room 12 or whatever it was. We went down, and apparently a first-time speaker had been put in front of a room of 60 plus, probably 80 people, and that person was not comfortable doing it. They had not practiced. They didn't know the material. And when they were called on it, this particular person was trying to go and ignore the question or say, oh, I know that. That's an exercise for the reader. And the audience was catching on immediately. This person didn't know the material. So in the end, students were leaving and asking for refunds based on someone who hadn't done their homework. I'm really sorry that happened for that particular presenter, but it also is why in this entire presentation I have kept saying you need to practice. You need to know the material. You need to practice again. You need to practice in front of a camera. You need to practice, because if you haven't taken the time to do your own homework, it's going to go badly. And it may not go badly on your first presentation, and you may be able to get away with it for a while. But I strongly encourage you to make sure you know what you're talking about, and that will help you with your confidence level. It'll help keep the butterflies down, and it means that you're avoiding one of the mines in this particular minefield.
Yeah, I totally agree with your point on practice, because I kind of went through that kind of cycle myself. Is you can read all the material, you can look at all the slides, and you can formulate in your head, this is what I'm going to say. But until you're actually speaking it, that's when you truly like learn how your brain works in those moments, and how you're actually processing, speaking out those things. So I totally agree with that. And actually, that leads well into a question that John just asked in GoToWebinar, is any insights for when you literally freeze, and any strategies to kind of keep calm and keep moving?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's an excellent question. It's going to happen. There will be points where you look at a slide and you can't remember what you were supposed to say about it, or you feel like your stress level has suddenly gone up and you're having trouble. Take a minute. Grab a glass of water. Breathe and relax. If you still find that you've taken 5 or 10 or 15 seconds, by the way, taking a break and getting some water is just fine. There's no problem with that. But if you find that your stress level isn't working and you just don't feel like you can continue at that moment, say to everybody, hey, I'm going to ask a favor. Can we take a short break? Say 15 minutes. Go out, get something to drink. I'll be right back. I need to take a short break, and we'll start back up in and give them the time that you're going to start again. You don't have to explain why. Just quietly say, I need a minute to recover. And then if you're a smoker, go out and have a smoke. If you find that you do best if you sit down and meditate for a few seconds, go ahead and do that. Do what it takes to get yourself comfortable. And realize that it's okay to take a break from time to time. I've been terribly sick when I've had to do some presentations, and I've had to say, look, I've got to take a break. And the class has always understood. There's never been a problem doing that. So absolutely stop and recenter yourself.
Excellent. Yeah, and it helps me also is when I'm kind of in that moment is to help remind myself this is not a presidential address. The whole world is not, hinging on every single word I say. And I mean, mistakes in your language is acceptable. I mean, it's human. We all do it. So
absolutely, I can count 5 or 6 that I've made in this presentation, and it's okay. It really is.
It is, and it's quickly forgotten. So it's not the end of the world.
Wonderful.
All right, Bill. Are there any other ways you would adjust a talk when you know the audience are senior members in the community / experts on the topic?
Oh, not senior in age, but senior in experience level.
Correct.
Great. There, it becomes more important that you understand what they're already going to know and be willing to take. You could have a long section of slides that cover a particular topic in detail, but they all know it. They've been using this particular package. This is their day job. You're talking at a company and they all know this particular one. Be willing to summarize those rather than go in and do the normal presentation you would do. That half hour before the talk begins, where you can sit down and chat with people, learn what they know, learn what they do, how they spend their day, what's their experience with this topic, what kind of things did you want to learn. That half hour becomes even more important there, because you really want to have an open discussion with everybody who's there before the class starts. To say, hey, is this something you guys have used before? Is this a tool you've used at your organization? And they're all like, oh yeah, well, that's how we all work. Every day we use that particular package. Be willing to shorten what would have been your coverage on the basics of that particular tool, and maybe go into some more detail about some things that they don't know or facets that they ask you to specifically cover. When there's a tool or a technique or a topic that they already understand, that also means there's some facets to that tool, technique, or topic that they don't understand and they'd like to know more about. Be willing to adjust your presentation to match those advanced techniques based on what you know about them.
So this one, I like this question. When giving a presentation, how do you perceive your audience as being engaged, and interested about what you're presenting, or vice versa?
Yeah. This is part of your ego. I want to be able to stand up in front of an audience and not have an ego that has to be filled by how my audience reacts to me. So my goal, as I've said during the main talk, is to make sure that the audience members have knowledge that they didn't have before, that they've learned something, that they have understood a technique or topic that they didn't know before. But when I'm watching them, there will always be people who are checking their mail, doing other things, responding to help tickets. I have people who get phone calls and need to leave. I ask people to leave the room if you have a phone call. It's no problem. Just step out in the hallway. But people have lives as well and priorities that have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So I want to be able to watch facial expressions and understand how well people are engaged. As people get bored, or they know the material, or this is just not of interest, they will immediately fall back to looking at their phone or their laptop or typing things or browsing Google News. It's okay, but I should be aware of how much that's happening. If I've got 60, 70, 80% of the class all heading off and doing other things, then something's terribly wrong with my choice of material or style of delivery or something. I may want to adjust that. But I don't want to take it personally, because nobody is insulting me by answering an urgent question that happened to come in over email from a customer. It's going to happen. If it happens a lot, then I should sit down and figure out how to address what people want to hear better. Especially on a multi-day class, this is an additional reminder that on days 2 or 3 or whatever, I need to go and find out what people would like to learn and focus the talk on that. And even on a single day class or a short presentation, I can ask at the break, what kind of things would you like to see covered that I haven't talked about already? And that helps me tune it to something that people would like to see. Did that answer the question, Jason?
I believe so. One quote I heard a long time ago, and I think it's changed over time, is that the difference between an audience of children and an audience of grown-ups is that you'll know immediately when you've lost the attention of the children.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is tougher. Reading people's facial expressions and what they're doing without taking it personally is a tough challenge. This is why having the material practiced and understood, so you don't have to focus on the material, but can focus on your class instead. That's another reason for practice.
Whenever I gave a presentation or taught, there was one thing I always looked for that I really enjoyed. It was when I would walk back and forth, I would look for that one student that was kind of kept following me, because the person in front was like, and that little sway, I was like, okay, cool. There's at least one person paying attention.
Good. I agree. And I also encourage people not to use a podium. To stand behind a podium is kind of the normal style of, oh, I'm giving a talk and I'm up here and I'm important and you should watch me because I'm behind a podium. I ask whenever I'm in an on-site venue, I ask them to take it away.
Yeah.
And even if I have a table, I ask them to move it off to the side. I want to be out talking to people and going up to them if they have questions and looking them in the eye and moving back and forth in front of the audience so that people can see me. And I think that's a far more positive way than saying I must have this protective barrier between me and the unwashed heathen crowd, even though most of them are washed most days.
I totally agree with that, by the way. Even from, talks I've watched, the more like informal or the more casual it is, the more everybody else relaxes as well. So.
Bingo. Yep.
I would say we're going to end on this one question here because we've gotten it a few times. How important is body language from the speaker?
Oh, absolutely. So if I'm standing here and I've got an angry expression, I'm, protecting myself, and you guys, if I'm scowling, that's a real problem. I would much rather watch someone who enjoys what they're doing, who smiles, who can hold a one-to-one conversation, who is respectful of their audience, and is only moderately good at the technical topic, than the world's expert on the topic who cannot hold a respectful one-to-one conversation and is defensive and feels their ego needs to be stroked. And I would rather see a fun presenter do a moderate job on the material than the guy who knows everything but just can't talk about it. In this industry, in the computer industry in particular, by the way, anytime I say guy, please don't take that as men can only do these presentations. Oh gosh, no. But in this industry, there's an unfortunate, is a tough job finding people who are technically competent and can present. And this is why we're giving this talk today, is that you can understand 5, 10, 15, 20 different technical things that you could talk about, but you've just never taken the time to do it. So we would rather have you start off with a good technical background and then migrate into actually talking about it, sharing what you know, putting it up on a YouTube video, doing a live presentation, signing up for Worldwide Hacking Fest, presenting to a users group, so that there are more people who fit in the categories of knows what you're talking about and can present effectively. We want to make that circle keep growing for people who can do both. It's really hard in this industry.
All right. Any final words as we wrap up today?
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you've got questions, send them over to Discord. We'll keep an eye out for questions. Make sure that you find somebody that you can present to, and start off with your dog if you need to, but work your way up to actually doing one-to-one presentations with friends. Get some practice time, and I think you'll get to a point where you're comfortable presenting to larger groups.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this Wild West Hacking Cast. We have a Hacking Cast next week, and probably one right after that, and another one after that. So feel free to stay here around on Discord and see our upcoming schedule, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everybody on the back end, and Thanks to everyone for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.